Okay, then we are going to do the last speech for this year. That's the roadmap. So, what our future holds is really about the future, not the past. We have a little bit of a time crunch right now, so we are not going to program so many features during the course of this year, so we don't have to talk about so much next time. So this is really about our roadmap. So really actual things that are going to happen. So really some of them are just fantasy projects. Some of them are definitely going to happen. So we're going to look at some concepts. So if we really think about our last conference and we really think about the roadmap we had, most of the things we actually did implement. So most of them turned into reality. So everything you see here is really not far from reality at all. And some of them are already being worked on right now. So Lars and I are going to take turns. So the first topic I would like to show you is activate changes. So let's talk about the roadmap first, though. So the path is very, very clear again. And the roadmap always depends not only on us, but also on you. So it is a do-it-yourself roadmap as well. So that means that you, being the user and the client, you can really influence that. And what I'm going to show you now is things that are already in the works. So that's going to be implemented pretty soon. So 140 is not going to have that, but the 150 is not too far in the future. So after the version is before the version. So everything's going to happen quite quickly. Okay, that is something that we've already talked about a little bit. And like I said, I told you, okay, where the Vato snapshots, where my discard changes and things like that. So that's our new concept for the whole topic of activate changes. And not only activating changes, but the whole concept of changes in general. So there are a couple problems when it comes to activate changes right now. And one that's always very important and people talk about all the time is if there are more people working in one system, but I only want to activate my changes. So you have a host, couple services with it, and you do activate changes and you see, oh, your colleague is doing something as well, and you only want to activate yours, but that's not possible right now. That is a problem. And of course, on the other way around as well. So Anka changes, that's not available anymore. And that is also something that is a problem as well, because you wouldn't only undo your changes, but also other people's changes. So maybe you also want to just activate selected changes, and that wasn't possible so far either. So another problem is a little bit more subtle. So there are some changes that are active right away without having to activate anything. For example, if it's the user surface, for example, notifications, things like that, we always thought that's a big positive. But now in this environment, in the distributed environment, it's not active right away, but only in the local sites. So it's not very, very clean in that aspect. And because of that, what we would like to do is the following. So we really want to, clean up, if you want to call it that. So first the question, why do we need to activate changes in the first place? So it's just a lot of work. It's annoying. So it's just something that Nagios does. You initiate text and files, and then you say, okay, restart it again or start it new. And so far now I'm thinking about it a little bit differently, because the concept of activate changes also has some benefits. Some benefits that even if you have professional systems like SAP, for example, they are used all the time. And that also means that you really can monitor very closely at what point in time changes are then going to be productive. And it's maybe not very helpful if you have a host that's going to be monitored right away, and then you're going to do the servicing later on, and then you do the threshold values and things like that. So I don't want that. I don't want this to be active right away. So I want to be able to define when that's going to happen. And that really gives me the power to really look at it again and maybe to not activate it if I don't need it. Okay, so the new concept looks as follows. So we have selected changes, so I can really choose to activate only specific changes, and others can then remain pending. So it can either only be my changes or just selected changes, and that same is also true for a rollback. Sounds easy, doesn't it? People always said, okay, why can't I only activate the active ones? But I'm going to show you some examples to show you why it's not easy. So example number one, you create a folder and you create a host in that folder, and then you roll back change one. Okay. Well, that doesn't make any sense. But the software needs to know that, because if the software doesn't know that, then you don't see the button rollback. So case number 2, you delete a host and you create a new host with the same name, and then you want to roll back change 1. And how's that supposed to work? Well, then you have the same host twice, right? There's a duplicate post. So for rollback, you need to check to see if you have a duplicate host by doing that. And the example number 3 would be you delete a rule and you do a rollback. And really, that would be recreating it, right? So you don't have to only remember what did I do, but I have to be able to undo it as well. So what was the state beforehand? Not during the last restart, but before that last change. So the implementation is not as easy as it sounds. Here's another example, example 4. Oh, we already had that. So it's just a copy. Okay. So the implementation, okay, each change is an intelligent object, and that needs to know, okay, how can I apply, and also how can I do the rollback. And of course, we also have to save it, load it on a disk. And of course, the changes need to know about dependencies to each other and to changes, so that the examples that we just saw are not going to happen. So for example, if I have a file, if I create a file and a host in that file, of course, I can roll back both changes, but not only the first one. So the second one needs to know it's dependent on the first one. And also, it could also be user A creating the file, and then user B could be creating the host. So again, we need the dependency on them among each other, and internally we're going to organize it in a way that all changes aren't executed directly, but only they're going to be translated in change objects first. And then the second step would be that they are then applied by another program part. So the Waito web API is benefiting from that, because each change is then structured in a unified way, and then it's very, very easy to access it. Okay, good. All right. And now Lars, maybe? Okay. Okay, the next point is going to be the time-controlled check parameters. So that is also something that was mentioned before, but overall what it's all about is really to simply have check threshold values that you configure, that they're not always valid, but also based on the time, and you can just define them by time. Okay, and that's going to work for all CheckMK checks generally. So all checks that you are using for parameters for discovery in Waito to configure. So for active checks, for example, that's not going to work for now. Or for manual checks, for example, that you're creating via Waito. So in addition to that, for configurations like, okay, which host belongs to which host group, of course, it's not going to work either. That is something that's really only concerning checks and not the whole rule set of CheckMK. So for checks itself, what's very interesting for check programmers is that it's completely transparent. So a check always gets the check parameters that are valid at that time point. And in addition to that, you also get one set of parameters. So it's either the one that is the full set from the program, or the set that is always supposed to be valid if you don't have any specific time that you specified. Okay, so the time itself is supposed to be able to be indicated in terms of time periods, and we can use that in CheckMK for many different things. The problem, if you want to call it that, is that so far, if you use time periods, you can only configure that as a Waito admin, but we are going to introduce that time periods can also be configured by regular Waito users, similar to passwords right now. So somebody can configure them for themselves and also make them available for other users or all users, always depending on the permission. Yeah, that's the check parameters. And the next topic is going to be structured status data. And again, that can be a very interesting thing. It could turn into something very interesting. So far, we know we make checks produce more useful data, and we capture a lot of data from the monitored system. And in the end, they really create a situation, and they really have different measurements in the end. That's really what the check does. So we have the hardware-software inventory by CheckMK, and again, they do inventory, and they then put it all in a tree, and why are we not sort of marrying the two and really make it where we have checks and we also make them do something that the data that is collected is then structured in a way very similar to the hardware software inventory, so that later on it could be a tree in the GUI that you can just browse through very easily, or maybe if you do an export, for example, it could be an external system, and all this data could then also be in an asset management system and you can use it there. An example of what is happening currently is what I just told you. So the checks tell you, okay, the table is generated right here. You have the name of the server and so on. And then on the right-hand side in this picture, you see the hardware software one. So this is really just an excerpt of the tree. And the idea behind it is that we are going to take this information, the information that we're getting from these checks, and we can then merge that with a hardware software inventory. And a question, of course, that arises is, why are we not doing it in the hardware software inventory? Because the information is getting there anyways. The information problem is that the hardware software inventory is really set up in a way that the data that's included here doesn't change all that often. But of course, we do the checks in intervals of a minute, and we want the data that derives from that checks that is also then current in that tree every minute, because data like the size of Oracle table spaces, for example, that you need in addition to all the other data that you have in the hardware software inventory, that can change very, very quickly and very often. So if we were to do that with hardware software inventory, that each check cycle, the history would then have a comment or a notification, and then of course it wouldn't make any sense anymore. So you wouldn't see, okay, between two measures the hardware software is going to change, and that's not what we want. So because of that, the idea is we are going to expand the checks by a data function. So far we have the check function, discovery function, and so on. And what we're going to do then is we're going to have these data, and they're going to produce this data, and then are going to then put it in that tree. And it's going to be very similar to the hardware software inventory plugins. And in the end, what we're going to have is a separate tree that's structured exactly the same as the hardware software inventory data, and they are then saved separately because one is changing not as often, the other one is changing very often, and via the GUI or the export they are then merged ad hoc. So that means, okay, I want it to be merged right now, that's when they're going to merge. Okay, so now we're going to be a little more vague. Those are our plans that we're possibly going to do. So for example, what we have is tickets. So you being the user, you are the client, you can then open tickets via email so far. Probably everybody's familiar with that. And what we're planning to do, or what we're thinking, what we're considering, is maybe being able to do that via the GUI. So just opening tickets so that the whole thing is not as painful for all parties. So it's not as much work. We don't have so much going back and forth anymore, because that happens with tickets very often. And by the time we have all the information that we do need in order to develop a check, for example, then we really have this back and forth of 2 to 3 emails. And that, of course, is probably more the rule than the exception. And of course, we could not do that if we have a GUI-led dialogue and we can then find out, okay, I need a check, and then there are 5 areas that you need to fill in, and then the check team already has all the appropriate information that they're going to need. So in addition to that, we can also, from the installation, also get meta information like your operating system and so on. And then we can also indicate that to you, and we can then ask you, okay, do you want to send that with the ticket? And then we can already get a lot of information that is going to be necessary. So we can then sort of enrich these initial tickets, and then hopefully we don't have that initial ping pong going back and forth anymore, and you're going to get a response much faster, a good response. Okay, good. So as an example, I brought you this. So just as an example, what kind of components we could have, what kind of categories. So this is just a first idea. So if we were to do a concept and think about it, then of course it's going to be a lot more detailed, I'm sure. But as an example, this is the check logment again. So again, we have all the questions that Simon already mentioned as well. So you can just implement that in the GUI. Okay, talking about performance. Performance, again, is a feature, and we have different problematic spaces in CheckMK if you find them. For example, in the storage use of CheckMK, for example, when it comes to CheckMK check helper, in some cases they need a lot of storage, and again, our first goal is to really gather a deeper understanding. Okay, why is that the case? And then for the next version, we might be in a position to really be able to improve this a lot. So maybe optimize this, and a possible change could be that we really are changing something about the helper model. I don't want to exclude that idea. We're still open to that. And yeah, like I said, we're just going to have to work on that, and we really have to look into it. We really have to find out what the problem is first. Another point that is pretty certain that we're going to do that is everybody that's involved is they probably know that they're involved. So the live proxy scaling for live status. So we have setups to up to 100 sites. You can use it very well, but we have some projects where it's necessary to have up to 300 sites in the multi-site. So just in the distributed setup. To do that, we are going to have to improve live status proxy and scale it so that it then is working with architecture and that it's just scalable. Another point that some of you might be familiar with is that there are different types of people and how they're using their browsers. The problem is that people sometimes collect so many tabs. They have 300, 400, 500 tabs open, and they're wondering why there's a problem. But for us, the really big problem is that the automatic refresh that our pages really have included. So for all open tabs, that's true. So they can be in the background how much they want. As long as Firefox is on, they are just reloading all the time. And overall, that doesn't make any sense for that, for everything that's just happening in the background. They're not visible anyways, and that is something that we to do very quickly, not for 1.4 but for 1.5, because it is possible that for this time of inactivity where the window is not visible anyways, you would then turn off the refresh, and as soon as the focus is back on, the refresh is then being done, and then you get all the current data. So that is being done for installations with lots of different users. For example, that is definitely going to be helped with the GUI performance. I'm very sure and very certain that this is going to be a good performance feature. Okay, and now let's talk about dreams. Matthias is going to tell us more about ideas and dreams. Yeah, he has lots of ideas actually. Well, these are not my ideas, but the topic of SLA, we already talked about that very briefly. So I think it was yesterday. So this is what we already have. And this is just an evaluation of the percentage of availability. We can also do events, we can measure events, and we can also do quite a bit. So we also have different ways to tune it already. And of course, we're not doing that in order to be sneaky here, but to just show reality. And real SLAs can be much more complex, though. So there can be crazy things in there in these agreements. So maybe max 3 problems, maximum duration of 30 minutes, and things like that. So very often these SLAs are very busy with the fact that they have something, some kind of problem, some kind of default that are allowed. It could be a time, it could be an event, it could be whatever. And what we have an idea. So step one would be that we are going to have a new module in CheckMK where you can specify more complex SLAs. An SLA could be 99.9% availability, and with the assumption that everything, any problem that occurs that takes less than a minute is not considered. And then you can then also have a different setup per different time period. You can say during this time period, I want this to be valid. In another one, I want that to be valid, and so on. The whole thing then has a title and a name. And of course, this is going to be expandable modularly. So if somebody says, okay, what I need is a very strange parameter from SLA, we can definitely include that as well. And all that can then be linked to hosts and services. And you can also add it as a regular user. You don't need way to rates for that. And step two would be you assign these SLAs to hosts and services via rules. And or BIs, of course. And then step 3, well, let's do step 1 again. So you can look at the SLA status, and status doesn't only mean, okay, yes or no, but it also means, okay, I already have 78% of my downtime. I've already used it up for this month, and I kept that, but this is important information, right? So that is something that makes it where I can plan ahead or be more cautious that something else doesn't happen, and so on. So of course, there's also an amount of fulfillment or under fulfillment and so on. So you can just see how much room there's left. And then the cherry on top would be that we have an active actual SLA monitoring. Monitoring means that you get a notification if the SLA is sort of right by being too high. So if you, I don't know, have 20% left, but you have almost a whole month left, then you could get a notification, you could get a warning, so you can take certain measures if you can. So for me, this is definitely SLA monitoring. And what's very difficult about it is really organizing it. The monitoring itself is not all that difficult anymore. I'm sorry, I can't hear the question. They're not using a microphone. Hold on, can you say that again in the microphone so we have it on our soundtrack? It's not, we have a soundtrack, and that's why you need it. Oh, okay. Okay, so my question is, or what I would like is right from the beginning, maybe you could maybe pave the way that these SLA can be entered from the outside. So what we're planning to do is to have all these SLA parameters in an SMDB, and then connect them to the SMD host. So who's which customer and what is our agreement and so on, what's in that database. And I would have that, and I could then, of course, also make that part of the monitoring tool. Well, if you're interested in being part of the conceptual stage of a project like that, well, unfortunately, we're not that far yet. So what I just said is everything I've thought about so far. Well, I think the idea is very good and very important. So thank you very much for that. So what we do need is a customer that really can talk about that with us. Well, we can definitely talk about that once you're ready, and then let's see what our situation is like, but I'm definitely open for that. Well, it's very important to think about it. Thank you very much for that contribution. Okay, do we have any other questions, anything you would like to add? Because our roadmap is almost done. We have 8 minutes left. So it's very clear that these are not all the points that we're going to work on over the course of the next year. There's lots more on our agenda, but since we only have a couple minutes, we just really have to kick out a couple of the new things that are going to come. So there's definitely more to come, and some things we haven't even thought about yet. Okay, I would like to talk about the creation of a ticket on the GUI for development, for example. Do you make that, can you configure who's the one that's receiving it, so the recipient? Be really interesting for clients to send it to partners, not necessarily you. That could make sense. Aha, okay, so the support email address would have to be in there, because if you have a support contract, you have your personal email address, and you have to configure that anyways. So by doing that, you do have that option anyways, so the configuration is already there. So I would say yes. So I think the feedback mails, that is also something that we did. They are going to our public feedback address, and that can be configured as well, the address. So it does make sense. Okay, did you ever think about, if you are working on the helpers, that you are make them capable of also having response via TCP so that you can distribute them? Load balancing, for example. Well, the problem is the waiting time of the helper. Well, I could have a TCP daemon, for example, that has a pool of helpers, and that is a different machine than the local one. Well, the helpers need access to the whole CheckMK data structure, so it wouldn't be as easy as it sounds. So they would have to be able to access watch files and so on. So the real problem is that the helper is contacting the CheckMK agent from some kind of server, and this server maybe takes 10, 20 seconds to answer, right? Some slow devices are always there. In those 20 seconds, the helper is just busy. It doesn't need CPA, but other things. And then, of course, we don't have a problem with CPU anyway. So if we make it that the wait to situation is eliminated, then we have two helpers. For example, one helper that only gathers data. It's very, very small, tiny program that would be good. And then once it has all data, then it gives it to the actual helper, and then it can just pass through and doesn't have to wait. So then we really only need one helper, because if they're all working, then of course that'd be good. So this is maybe a concept that could work. And then we could avoid that we have to use different devices, which of course for the user would be a lot more convenient. Well, there are some DMZ things where I would say, okay, distributed monitoring doesn't work in this case because, for example, I have parent-child connections that don't work so well and things like that. And in this case, an Alamod-Girim method would actually be good to really distribute different processes and would just be a lot more convenient. Well, like I said, CheckMK needs its infrastructure. It needs the whole environment, also needs access to the core sometimes to really access time periods that are active right now. So it's not possible to separate them. However, if you are remotely accessing the GMZ, then you can also just use a distributor and you only get the agent data. So before you do SSA, you have the check helper. You can do SSH, some simple proxy that only has the ancient data, and then you process them centrally. But the question is always, okay, what's your actual problem? Because in our case, it was really about performance overall, and what you're talking about is really the architecture. So you have in DMZ, for example, that it doesn't work so well, or there are just limitations and things like that. And I'm sure there are going to be some other ways to resolve that problem without really having to change the whole architecture in CheckMK itself. Okay, thank you very much. I have a brief question or remark about creating tickets in the CheckMK GUI. Please consider that a lot of monitoring systems don't have internet access and they cannot send out emails. Yeah, we've heard that. So maybe a little download button might help. Yeah, why not? So overall, it's really about collecting data. And we do that with crash reports already because it's a lot easier for the user to just click a button and say, okay, I'm just going to send it all, because you see what you're sending us. It's not a secret, right? And it's always going to be an option anyway. So the path via email is always going to be available. You can always send an email. We don't want to limit that in any way at all. So this is just supposed to be extra help so that we can both really gather all the data that we need in order to solve the problem as quickly as possible, and then build a check or whatever needs to be done. And of course, we're not going to call you at home either. Okay, in the beginning of the conference, we talked about capacity management. Are there maybe a couple of things you want to say about that? Are you planning on doing anything? Lars, do you want to answer that? Well, yes, I can tell you that there are some discussions, and they are pretty straightforward already. But in terms of technical details, I really don't have any facts that I can give you right now. Matthias, do you know anything? Well, overall, the idea is that we are collecting lots of measurements in the round-robin files, right? And you can also show them graphically in curves. But what we want to do is really find a way to have the possibility to calculate numbers by doing that and then put them in a table, or maybe compare them with threshold values and things like that. So if I said, for example, I'm going to look at the last month and I want the average CPU availability or whatever, then I want a number and not only a curve, and that's really what it is. And when it comes to capacity management, we also have the idea that we might have an intelligent trend calculation. So there are some algorithms, modern algorithms, that not only consider the incline, but maybe also different periods and things like that, and also deviations. So if I have a value that's continuously growing by 1 megabyte per day, so without deviations, of course, you can really calculate that, because if I have really erratic curves, then you can also calculate that, but you need a result, and you really need the possibility or likelihood corridor. So I want to be able to see in the result how likely is it that this is going to happen. And to me, this is really part of the trend calculation that's very important. So this is still the conceptual stage, but if we're going to do that, then we really want to have something that actually works and works well. Okay, during the last conference, we had a net flow type system that was an optional development thing. So that is something that's not current anymore. So is that something that you thought about still? Probably is a lot of work. Well, net flow, that sort of stopped a little bit. Do we have something current? No, there are certain requests, but they were very vague. And again, we really didn't have any designs that we were able to make because the ideas on the side of the customer, what needs to be integrated in what way and so on, they really weren't very straightforward. So it was just a question, well, can you do it in general? And can we do that with CheckMK? And so far, we didn't address the topic at all. And I do see it, though. I do see that it's a very interesting topic and it could make sense. But of course, from our point of view, we really need a lot of know-how from third parties in terms of learning what is needed. We really need the requirements. So customers ask us what kind of net flow, well, do you do net flow? We said yes. And then we said, okay, what do you need exactly? And they said, well, we don't know. And of course, then we can't help, because we can't do anything if they don't tell us what they need exactly. And that's why it sort of just, stopped a little bit or slowed down a lot. So if you want to pursue that and you have specific requirements, then please let us know. So if you have some knowledge what you want to do with the net flow, then of course we're going to take it a step further. No problem. Okay, good. We have another question. Third row from the front, left block, all the way on the right. So I just have a very brief question generally about the topic of road mapping. So over the past few days, what we were talking about, okay, well, recently I didn't really look at the homepage anymore, but I always have the problem a little bit that I'm missing an overview of what kind of version I get which feature. I mean, I understand the whole principle of works in general, but I always have to check up, okay, am I really using the jargon you're using in your work, and am I finding a work, and then I can look at, okay, what version is it suitable for? But if I have version 128, or maybe the next feature releases or whatever, then I don't know, okay, what's still to come. Okay, do you want to see what's already programmed or what's still to come? Well, what's already there? I need a feature matrix, really, and also what to expect. So we are not using daily snapshots for us, so I'm not permanently going to really be very, very current when it comes to that. But when I go to 1.5 or 1.4 innovation, for example, I would like to see, okay, what's coming, what's planned. The roadmap right here is very nice, but I'm sure things are going to change over the course of the next year. So things are just going to develop, and then maybe there are just going to be new things for 1.5. So the things that already have a work number, you can research them on our website. So you can see, okay, what's in 1.40, what's included, and you can then just look at it in chronological order. So you can definitely research it very easily. It's weighted by very important, and it is weighted by important. Then for the future, what we're considering is that we might formalize that in a little bit, so that maybe information might be available over things that we are working on right now, but we're not really sure what that's going to look like yet. So in addition to what Matthias just said with the works, so the things that are going to be in the version, usually what we do when we have the announcement of a stable release, we also have a management summary again, so that you can see, okay, what kind of big changes are there in the new version. But that's only for the release of 1.40. But it's very difficult to summarize it. As you can see during this conference, for example, over the course of 2 days, we gave you so much information. So when that was really just one new version, and we really left out so much, and really having a matrix and a summary is very, very difficult. And because of that, just come to this conference every year and you can learn what's new. Okay, we have another question. I would like to say something about works as well. What would be very convenient for us, especially for works that you take out right after you introduced it, really, that it's recognizable what version it is. So sometimes we skip a couple patches and things like that, and a couple of the things that was patched 3 versions ago we never even saw, because the one after that it was only introduced. Yeah, that's true. So we don't formalize that in these works, which version could be affected by works, and of course that could make sense to really formalize that as well. So really you have to also indicate that, but so far that's really due to the person that is writing the work. Some people do it, some people might forget it. So it's really all up to the person that's writing it. But it's a very good point, definitely. Well, there's a very important rule, so I'm not sure if we document that, but if we are programming a feature and it has a bug and we fix that bug, then this bug fix is not a work, but only if this feature was in a release already. So if we do something new in the daily build and the next day it has a bug, then it's not two works, it's still one. And that reduces a little bit. But you are definitely right. Sorry, no microphone. So we have to just write a works when we're putting a bug in. And then we're also going to write down when we're going to fix it so you can schedule accordingly. Well, I have the problem that the automatic updates didn't work anymore, and that was P18 or 17 or something like that, I'm not sure. And then that was fixed 2 versions later. So except for the agents and really installing them manually, and luckily I only have a 15 agent-based system, so there was no way to fix that, right? So I never found a way on your website. Yeah, that was very, very painful for us. It was very inconvenient. Of course, that shouldn't happen. And yeah, I think it was your fault personally, wasn't it? Yeah, that's why I said I don't only have the responsibility, but it was really my fault. But as I didn't find it in the log, I didn't even find where the problem was of that whole thing. Well, I described it in the works. I also wrote down which version it was in there. I'm not 100% sure what the text actually said anymore, but of course it should be described in there, the cause of it, and then also when you can fix it, which version, and usually if there is a workaround, that's also included how you can get help. At this point in time, it was a little bit difficult. It wasn't that you can just tighten a screw and it works. Well, I would also like to talk about the feature of the agent uploader, so you can limit the deployment. So for cases like that, that's exactly what it's meant to for. So if everything works great the next day, then you can do it. But the error, then the next update, then doesn't work. Of course, that's not something you would see right away. So we're very sorry about that. So hopefully it didn't affect too many people. No, we're not going to ask them that. Let's not do a survey. Okay, I have another question right here. I would like to know when 1.4 is going to be available, the stable version. Well, hopefully end of May is going to be good enough. I don't have the exact day, but it's going to be end of May. That's what we're going to do. Okay, so we have a last question back there. Well, if people have questions, let them ask questions. I have lots of time. Okay, so before you send us home, I just wanted to do the crowdfunding thing. We talked about that last year, I think, and this year we talked about it. So I was here last year. My colleague said, well, if you're there, just ask somebody if we can also do our blank infrastructure with CheckMK. I can't walk around and say, okay, do you have any checks for Splunk? Can I ask that? Does anybody have checks for Splunk? One person. Ah, okay. Don't run away. So maybe we could think of something that we maybe have a community or something like that, so we can just exchange information a little bit better, because regardless of how many people we talk about, we are writing a lot of checks ourselves as well, where others might say, well, I have something already and so on, and I'm sort of missing this community a little bit, because we could help each other. Do you know our mailing list? Well, there's lots of traffic there. Should I just write down who has something for Splunk? Yeah, sure, why not? It's usually worth it. And there are some people that are very, very active on there as well. Well, if you don't do it then and then you want credits for it, I'm not sure what you're talking about it. Okay, what I think is really great, so if we have a possibility GUI-based, so that we have different topics, and regardless of the mailing list now, but if you maybe could have something where you could maybe just discuss things, we could have discussions together, because the mailing list is a little bit of a problem because it's always very, very long, so there are different things that you contribute things to, and if there was a forum or something like that, it'd be very cool. So we could just say, okay, I'm just going to open a topic, for example, and I just want some input, and then it's all there, and then if somebody's looking for it, they're also going to find all this conversation, graphically. And I think that would be very, very cool if we had something like that. The mailing list is a little old-fashioned. I know that from my time way back when emails were introduced. And then I also have a suggestion, and I think it would be very cool, especially for the whole topic of network checks. So something where you have maybe have simple programmable checks where maybe there could be a GUI possibility that could be created. So if you have SNMD, for example, you just want one value that you can just do that way. That could be a good possibility, especially if you want to get people away from programming. I don't have a problem with programming, but I think it would be pretty cool. And we have a couple people in our company as well that might be very interested in that. Well, that's a question that we get on a regular basis again and again. And I would say the plugin CheckMP is something that's available. So if you look at the plugins that we have for that and the percentage of plugins that are getting a value and then compare it with something that's less than 5%, probably 3%. So in the real world, there are no checks that make sense and they just gather one value and then compare it. You always need to get two. You need to compare, then you have to multiply it by 1,000. You need to have a threshold value from somewhere else, and then you already have a little program language, and then we are where we are right now. So that's why we didn't do that very often, the whole idea that you can just configure checks. So of course you can really have an Nagios check SMP that does exist. It can do that, but it's almost never good enough. And that's just our experience. So it's probably something like using the documentation. How do I build a check? That's pretty old. It's all not that old. So maybe just adjust it to the current API. There's also a CheckMK Part 3 class, and we work on Python, and then we create checks. Always a lot of fun. So those of you that have the possibility to invest that time and to just go there, I can highly recommend that. It's a very, very good training, and people have lots of fun there. Okay, I would like to talk about, somebody said that this crowd possibility would be good, crowdfunding. And I think the idea is an idea that popped up quite often. And I'm sure there are a lot of people that would say, okay, I don't have enough time to really deal with checks for a day or two, but I know two people who might also be interested in it. And if we really have more transparency, then I'm sure there are a lot of people that would be supportive here. And I think we should just have this community. I think we're going to consider that. We're going to consider maybe introducing something like that, because projects that are current, that are probably going to be implemented, they could be put on the website, so you would get an information. You would say, okay, this is something I'm interested in as well, and this is sort of what you're talking about, is it? Well, last year we took pictures, and last year you took pictures and you said, okay, who would be interested in that? And right away you say, okay, I'm not the only one that's interested in it, maybe others are too. So sometimes you have features in the beginning where you would say, okay, it might be nice, but now somebody else might say, oh, I have that, that's what I need, and then I'm thinking, oh, I need that as well. Maybe that's something that I didn't even consider beforehand, and then if you could then say, yeah, I'm interested in that as well, I want to participate, I want to be part of that, and that would be really great, because that might also be very good feedback for you. Well, I think we're going to consider that. We're going to think about it. I think that's also very, very good. And there is a concept that's called bounties. And you can put suggestions in there. They can say, okay, what they're willing to pay. And then others can contribute as well. And they can say, okay, I can contribute this much, for example. Well, I've seen something like that. The financial aspect, I would say that's not something I worry about all that much. What I think is a problem is the conceptual idea behind it, because the customer has a requirement. We're trying to work with concepts, and we suggest it, and then another customer is going to come and say, okay, I have something similar, but then we have to adjust it and work on it again. So if you really then put it in stone, then you write on the website, okay, this is exactly what we're going to program, then I'm a little bit scared that the flexibility is going to get lost to really be able to really fit all the needs or meet all the needs of people. I mean, if it's different things, if it's a check plugin for device X, for example, that might be easy. But even then, you would think, okay, how do I set it up? And I really want to keep that up, that we have that dialogue with customers, that we really want to find a customized solution, maybe a solution that is really solving their problems as well. Not maybe only for one, but maybe for several ones as well. So concepts like that are always connected with lots of dialogues. And if it's really just a one-way street and you just describe it and you put it on the website and then you have a vote on it, then I sort of feel like this could become a problem. and maybe whatever comes out of it is not the best solution anymore. So we're definitely going to consider it, but I would say, yeah, we're going to have to do something. But before we get started with that, we definitely have to think about it in detail and make sure that it's going to turn out good. Okay, good. So we're still going to be available after this conference. We're still going to stick around, at least some of us. So you can always approach us. And I would just like to say thank you very much to everybody for being here, of course, and also for asking so many questions, so much feedback, and negative as well as positive feedback. That motivates us a lot. It motivates us to continue all the negative things because that really shows us the weaknesses and also the positive thing that we see. Okay, we're definitely on the right path here, and we're very happy to hear that, of course. And also, thank you very much to our team. I really liked all the speeches, all the contributions. I'm very, very happy that we have the team that we do have. It's a lot of fun. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you next year.